Aldridge's Sam Wiles is the host of the Paul or Nothing podcast. Love that name. And joins me now. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Kath, what's going on? Thank you so much
Yeah,
for having me.
you're very, very welcome. Thanks for coming on. We thought we would mark this because, again, it's someone who I think I've been referring to as a musician's musician because that's what Denny Laine was, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, he's been rubbing shoulders with all of the greats since the very earliest days of the 60s British invasion. He's pretty much played in a band with everyone if you go back, but like he'll have been in that band for 2 months and they didn't release an album, but he can still check off those famous names and they all run through him. He's certainly one of the most pervasive Birmingham artists to ever emerge. And I mean, when you consider that when Muller Kintyre came out, he was the co-writer on that. That was the biggest single in the UK at the time. It beat the Beatles' She Loves You. And so for quite a long time, the biggest song in the UK was co-written by a Brummie. So that's one of my favourite things about Denny Laine, really is.
Yeah, I mean, this really speaks to something that I was thinking about actually the other day, which is actually people struggle sometimes to get the full list of success in music from the West Midlands because some of it is a bit more hidden. And musicians know about it, but maybe the general public or the household stuff, it's not as, we've got the big ones, but people are a bit like, oh, I'm not sure where to go after Black Sabbath or whatever. Actually, there are loads of people who've been hugely influential in lots of different ways that are from the West Midlands, and Denny Laine's one of them.
Yeah, I mean, everyone from Jasper Carrott to Denny Laine, there's no end to the influence, really. It's been a bit of a shock. It really has. I mean, we'd heard on the grapevine. Denny's wife's been rather open on social media about his condition. There was a benefit concert last month in November. That was a star-studded thing. And we kind of thought that was going to be like a positive turnaround. We'd heard some good things, but unfortunately, as we heard yesterday, he has passed away. And it's been a heartbreak for the fandom. For Paul McCartney fans, Denny's one of those kind of low-key fan favorites. Like most Beatle fans who try to pretend like they're cool and different will be like, well, actually, I like George and Ringo. That's a bit of a Denny Laine angle to take because he really is the underdog in that story, in the Wings narrative. Obviously, he came up with loads of bands earlier. Obviously, the Moody Blues was the big one. You played Go Now Just. That really established him on the scene. But then you've got things like the Electric String Orchestra bands through to the George Baker stuff. He does Say You Don't Mind, which becomes a top 20 hit for Colin Bluestone of the Zombies. But once he gets into Wings, the actual benefit of him being a Brummie actually comes to the forefront because there really wasn't much of a music scene when he was first starting in the very early 60s. But what Birmingham did have was a very diverse population and a very multicultural workforce. And this meant that Denny, when he was learning music, he wasn't just learning rock and pop, but he had blues, reggae, country, musical, all styles that coincidentally he would end up having to do in a band with Paul McCartney, because Paul McCartney never does the same thing twice. He never does the same album twice or the same song twice. And so if Denny thought he was going to be in a blues band with Paul from, the next foreseeable future, that was never going to happen. But fortunately, he was multifaceted and multi-talented in a very special way.
How did they meet? How did Denny get involved? I mean, I presume it's through the musical world and musical circles. How did he meet Macca, really, and get involved there?
So that comes in the form of yet another band, Denny and the Diplomats, who were really big in Birmingham back in the day. But they were famously never on record. There were a few like fan demos here and there. But they were the opening act for the Beatles at the Plaza Ballroom in July of '63, I believe. That's likely where they first met. But obviously, once he was in the Moody Blues, he's up there with the Faces and the Kinks and the Stones at all the right parties. So it's clear that he and Paul were rubbing shoulders that way. And the thing with Wings is Paul didn't decide, I'm gonna pick the best band with all the best artists. He didn't do that. Instead, He just picked people he wanted to hang out with because he knew he was going to be on tour with them. It was meant to be a touring band. And for him to immediately think of Denny, I think really speaks to his character.
Yeah.
Like, the biggest artist in the world who could have easily just gone, okay, let's get Clapton and Billy Preston. I'll just do a supergroup. No, I'm going to pick this Brummie lad who's got a nice sense of humour and I like having a drink with him. I think that is,
and he's pretty good as well. Pretty good as well. But I know what you mean. He could have had that stardom thing, but he didn't. He wanted someone he got on with, and quite right too. And obviously, Sir Paul, leading those tributes. You think that would have been straight away as soon as he heard it? He would have been keen to sort of put that out there because it is a lovely tribute that he's made.
Yeah, thankfully, as he says in the tribute, they did patch up after the breakup in recent years. That was always something nice to read on social media when Denny was putting that out there as well. And it is rather fitting because Denny was there with Paul at Air Studios the day after everyone found out John Lennon had been shot, had been assassinated. And Denny was there with Paul when Paul leaned. He was leaning out the window and he saw a green truck and it had Lennon furnishings on it or something like that. And Paul turns to Denny and he's like, I'm never going to fall out with someone again and not make up with them. Like nothing like that's ever going to happen again.
Wow.
And I'm glad Paul lived up to that and it didn't happen with Denny and they did make up in the end.
Oh, yeah, because it's bands, isn't it? They can be quite difficult places. I know I'm in one. And sometimes, it isn't easy. And when you're at that level, it must be very difficult. But yeah, they made up. And that tribute from Macca is really, really lovely. Thank you so much for talking to us, Sam. It's been great.
Awesome. No, thank you for having me on. I just wanted to give a shout to one of Birmingham's finest sons. Rest in peace, Denny. And I end every episode of my podcast with the song No Words from Band on the Run. Obviously, Denny died on the 50th anniversary of the US release of that album. And I always close out every episode by saying, play us out, Denny. So if you don't mind, just on BBC WM, play us out, Denny.
Oh, Sam, thank you so much. Oh, that was very moving. Sam Wiles from Aldridge, host of the podcast Paul or Nothing.